Mr. President of the Academy, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this evening we climax the week's activities with the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Lecture. And the lecturer will soon be introduced by the chairman for the occasion. These lectures have been delivered since 2003. And today we have an august lecturer to treat a topic that should be dear to the hearts of many, if not all of us here. Before I call on the chairman, we want to render our sincere thanks to the sponsor or sponsors for this evening's function. This evening's function is fully footed by ISE of the University of Ghana. Shall we applaud them? Now the chairman for the function, Professor Akila Patsoya, who really needs no introduction. Suffice to say that before becoming the president, Professor Soya was the vice president for the art session. And I think many of you will know him as the former vice chancellor of the University of Ghana, Professor Soya.
Members of Council, fellows of the Academy, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and as always, our students. Let me begin by apologizing again for the delay in the start, but more important, to thank you very much indeed for your patience and courtesy during this difficult period. I have no doubt that the lecture will more than justify the patience you've shown so far. The Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Lecture is the climax of the Founders Week celebrations of the Academy. We therefore strive very hard to find lecturers who fit the bill, who can deliver an appropriate presentation for the occasion. And I'm happy to say that once more, we have selected somebody who will fit the bill. My only concern is that he had to walk here from quite a distance. But being a strong young man, I'm sure he's recovered. And we're doing just fine. Professor Ite is best known as the immediate past Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana. He is currently the Secretary General of a new institution, the African Research Universities Alliance, based, I think, here. Yes. He is an economist, as we all know, with an interest in institutions and their role in development, regional integration, and very importantly, small enterprise development and microfinance. He is widely published, and I don't think I need to spend any time on that. Take it for granted. He is a scholar who is published and well known everywhere. Apart from that, and more relevantly to this evening's lecture, he has been a Vice Chancellor and he spent time as well as Senior Fellow and Director of the Africa Growth Institute at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. So clearly, he has enormous experience of higher education, research, and teaching. And the topic he has chosen for this evening is appropriate. In a country where we've just been transforming polytechnics into universities by degree. The topic ought to be interesting for all of us. And I cannot wait to hear Professor Aite on this topic. Ernest.
Mr. Chairman, President of the Academy, Vice Presidents of the Academy, members of Council, past Presidents of the Academy, Fellows of the Academy, our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by also apologizing. I feel I have two different senses running through me now, anger and embarrassment. So the embarrassment is towards you for keeping you waiting for almost 2 hours. And I'm very sorry about that. I had left home, I thought with ample time to be here. I didn't realize that it was going to be impossible. I've used so many different ways to get here. The last 400 years walking. So I'm very sorry about it. Please pardon me. It's not my style to keep people waiting. I'm very, very sorry. The anger is about why should this happen? But that one we can deal with later. So as our chairman has said, I'll be speaking on the theme, the future of the African university, the future of the university in Africa. Does it have a future? Thank you. My main message this evening, I think I should give you the main message, so just in case, as a result of the frustration and everything, I failed to deliver it properly, you would know what I intended to say. I begin by saying that Africa is capable of finding for itself globally competitive universities. Globally competitive. I chose the expression globally competitive for a good reason. When I was at Legon and I spoke about world class, people took it for granted and they made fun of it. I don't want anybody to make fun of what I'm going to say, so I'm not going to use world class. I say globally competitive. Well, you know what it means? It means basically that African universities can teach as well as others do in Europe or in America. And they can do equally good research and provide equally good service to the community. These are the things that go into being globally competitive. That if a young researcher at KNUST is applying for a grant, he will have as good a chance as somebody from Liverpool or from Warwick or from Yale. That's the whole idea. And I say it can be done with two prerequisites. The need for us to use more technology in the way we teach, the way we do the research is important. And the need for us to use the technology, even by our students, the way they learn, is very, very important. And for this to happen, the way universities are governed, as you can see, my notes are now arriving, the way universities are governed must change. And if the governance does not change, you're not going to get the technology. And if you don't get the technology, you are not going to be globally competitive. This is a message. So if, for nothing at all, that's what I wanted to say this evening. So in the presentation, I do it in 4 parts. I begin by providing a purpose for universities, especially here in Africa, a purpose. Then I talk about recent trends in the globe in terms of the development of universities. Then I talk about the state of our universities here in this region. And then I close by talking about what we need to do in order to be competitive globally. These are the 4 big areas that I want to pursue this evening with you. Now, why universities? What's the purpose for having a university? Usually, there are 3 names that are associated with the purpose or discussing the purpose of universities. And this is something that has changed. We begin by looking at Wilhelm von Humboldt, a German philosopher, diplomat, who started the Humboldt University in Germany. So he has been very instrumental in getting us from the early years to understand what a university is about. The other person, or the second person, is the Cardinal Newman, John Henry Newman, who used to be an Anglican priest and later on became a Catholic, the Catholic bishop, and then began the university, the Queen's University in Belfast. And then Lord Robbins, an LSE economist. They've played different roles. For Humboldt, the university was about having a community of people together searching for the truth. It was a matter of how you define the truth. Many of those who were interested in the truth were associated with the church, the Catholic Church especially, and later on associated with the Evangelical Church. So it was the search for the truth. That's why many of the early European universities are associated with churches. Then we come to Cardinal Newman, who, having spent many years at Oxford and also with the church, had come to understand clearly what role education should play and how universities would fit into that line of thinking. For him, a university was about teaching universal knowledge. How do universities provide this universal knowledge? All the things that as a people, as citizens of a nation, we should believe in. The knowledge that will propel industry, the knowledge that will propel agriculture, the knowledge that will propel everything that we do is the job of the university to produce it. So you go beyond searching for the truth. And then finally, Lord Robbins, he was an LSE economist, what you call a socialist economist, very rare in these days, but in those days quite common. Lord Robbins was commissioned by the Labour Party in the UK in the midst of agitation to help the government define the purpose for the universities. Basically, why should we as government be spending so much money on these universities that are almost always on one demonstration or strike after the other? And he came up with the idea that universities are there to provide a number of things. First, provide instruction in skills, the promotion of general powers of the mind, advancement of learning, the transmission of a common culture and common standards of citizenship. Basically, the university should provide policy support. That's another way of putting it. University should generate all the knowledge that we need to provide policy support. So the university should do work which will be useful for the advancement of society. So these are the things that have been associated with what universities should be doing over the years. Now, I move from there and then go to Africa. We, of course, the early universities in Africa were associated with Islam. We know about the universities in Egypt and also in Timbuktu. But the modern university in Africa began with the British colonial government looking for possible ways of introducing university education to parts of Africa. But it didn't come out of simple altruistic motives of the colonial government. It was largely as a result of agitation. Universities like Ibadan, like Legon, were developed because the local people were agitating for universities. Here in Ghana, we know the role that J.P. Dankwa played. In Nigeria, there are quite a number of... So the report of the Asquith and Elliott committees were very significant in the sense they reflected what people wanted. So the response was having these committees in place to do what today we do. Of course, why was the agitation? The local people, many of them, or some of them had gone to study abroad, come back, and now we're looking at careers in the civil service and not seeing where it was taking them, and therefore we're anxious that they should advance, they should do more studies, and what better way to do it than have a university around? So their motivation for pushing for these universities was also for their own personal progression. So basically, the British government accepted this in order to forestall any agitation. Now, so we know why we have our university, what is expected of them in general. What you see here, basically, are we arguing that the governments in Africa that later on inherited these universities never really articulated a more profound motivation for having universities, and hence their own expectations of what universities should do. So we go to more recent global trends. Today, the university in the world is being influenced by very much the same things. One is globalization. Globalization makes it possible for us to share information electronically and in other ways much more easily. It's being influenced by internationalization. How do we put in place a culture that's influenced by academics from other universities outside of our own domain? And then technology. So these are the three things that have motivated more recent developments. So let's go to Europe. In Europe, the change that we see, or we have seen in the last 2 decades, has been driven largely by the European Union. By the European Union. Why? The purpose being to narrow the gap between European and North American universities, and also ensure that within Europe itself, the gap between the Oxfords and Cambridge against the less well-known universities in the rest of Europe, Central Europe especially, will be narrowed. So that's what, and I give you a long list of things that they wanted to achieve with that, especially breaking down barriers around universities in Europe. Taking away the Ivy League, the Ivory Tower image that universities had. How do you remove these barriers and bring them closer to the people? That's one of the motivations. So there's a long list of motivations there. But there are two things that, that's one thing especially that we associate with that whole process. Of course, there's the Lisbon Treaty and then the Bologna process. Where the European Union basically was seeking to create world-class universities in Europe. How would we in Europe, in their mind, have universities that could compare easily with Caltech or MIT or Stanford? How is it going to be done? So that's a major consideration being pursued. How would we have centers of excellence? And then, in doing so, they paid attention to three things, namely, how degree level study will be organized and certificates provided for them. And then the second thing was an interest in the outcomes of those studies. How do you ensure that some of the best graduates in the world were coming from European universities? And then finally, harmonization. Harmonization, basically the interest in making sure that the degree from a small Italian university is worth as much as a degree from the University of Bonn or from the University of Newcastle, and so on. How do you ensure that? How do you ensure that certificates coming from the Netherlands would be easily acceptable to employers in the UK or in Germany? That was the major consideration being pushed here. So we've seen that how that happened. In Asia, there was a lot more interest in having world-class universities. The Asians, like their European counterparts, were quite anxious to have universities that easily could match any North American university. So I give the examples in Hong Kong, where there was so much pressure placed on professors to produce in distinct world-class journals. The more you produce in these, the higher the likelihood that you progress, and also the more money you made. The incentive system was structured to favor those who produced and published in particular types of papers, not just any predatory journal. So that's what the Asians have done. Vice chancellors in Hong Kong have been assessed depending on where they rank. How much you earn depends on where you are placed in the global rankings. So it's in your interest to ensure that your university is doing well. So if it does well, you get also better remuneration. I wish we had that in Ghana. So I give the Chinese example. Sorry. I give the Chinese example. In China, very much propelled by the same kind of ambition, the government has put in place quite a number of incentive packages, a major one being to transform Tsinghua and Beijing University to becoming world-class universities. For them, it meant being in the top 50 universities in the world, getting these two to be in the top 50 in the world. That was what the Chinese government, and then bringing along another 100 universities into the top 400 of the world. So for them, the best 400 universities in the world should have at least 100 Chinese universities, and they paid for it. Japan, for many years, was the leader in intellectual development in Asia for many years. But Japan saw how in the 1980s and 90s, it began to fall behind other smaller Asian countries, especially Hong Kong and China. That propelled the Japanese to do something. So the government launched what they call the Flagship Universities Project, basically ensuring that their best universities would become world-class. Note that in all of these documents, in all of these countries, they focus on becoming world-class, basically beating the best American universities. That's what the focus was on. So now I go to technology and the higher education outcomes. And I make the point that in all of this, technology became the central thing. So the European Union votes 58 billion euros for new equipment, new technologies to be developed for universities. The Chinese government puts in $200 billion. The Japanese government, not so, an amount not too dissimilar. So they put money into technology. They invested heavily in technology for these universities. Grants for research were in abundance, and the equipment that would allow world-class research to be done was also basically available. Technology is also used to drive access for people to education, using the technology to make students more acquainted with more recent literature, something that has been a major part of the reforms that have taken place, and ensuring that the professors were well-informed and well-equipped. When it comes to the way technology has been used, there are a number of initiatives. I don't think I want to go through all the examples that I have in the slides, but one of the most interesting ones that everyone talks about is the development of MOOCs, the massive open online courses. So what it means really for those who may not be familiar with it, a university like Stanford develops a program, a course in electrical engineering, and makes that course available online to anybody in the world, whether you are in Abradunga or you are in London. You have access to it. So you can take this course listen to the professors deliver through video, and take exams in some cases, These are massive. So you are able to sit at Abroad and take a course at Stanford without paying Stanford fees. That's one of the major developments made possible by technology. So you have all these MOOCs all over the place. Stanford was one of the leading, and since Stanford began, all the Ivy League universities in the US are doing it. Quite recently, I was approached by colleagues at Yale that if I had nothing to do with my retirement, I should join them to write a new MOOC course for Coursera, a new MOOC on African development. It's something that probably is worth thinking about. If you want to get a degree from Yale, especially in African development, I don't want to pay Yale school fees. I can sit in Accra and they will give it to you. That's one of the things, Peter. I think you might consider that. Of course, we talk about the UK's Open University, which have been offering free online courses since 2006. So the new thing is offering online courses. And there are professors in those places that you can engage with who help you to understand these. India is doing that. The Chinese are doing that in Tsinghua and other places. And I said the technology is also influencing the traditional campus-based teaching and learning. Typically in most of our universities, we have a professor who walks into the lecture room and then does a presentation to students based on material that they may or may not have read. So the lecturer comes and does a delivery to them, and they take notes. Sometimes they are handouts and so on. What is happening with these virtual learning environments is that the material to be used for the lectures is made available to students online by the video way before the lecture actually takes place. So they receive it, they study it, they read it. They're not like Ghanaian students, they read it actually. And then they come for a discussion. They come for a discussion. And in this discussion, the focus is on the professor trying to make you understand what you've read. So based on the questions that you've become familiar with. So here we talk about Blackboard. These are softwares available for facilitating some of these discussions. We have what we call the flipped classrooms, where basically instead of the lecturer giving you the material, you receive the material way before the lecture takes place. And so the classrooms scenario have been flipped over. That's what they mean by flipped classrooms. Blended learning. At Legon, we've been dealing or talking about blended learning, basically a combination of face-to-face interaction and the online interaction also. So these are new things that are coming up, which we believe have made a very big difference. Are they having any impact? Are they having any impact on the way students study? There's one study from San Jose State University, which looked at how students performed after going through these flipped classrooms. And according to the study, there's evidence that their performance improved. They scored much better in tests. These are more examples of these technologically driven. Now talk about technology and research. There are a number of things that have happened. Digital curation and preservation, big data. Every time you walk into any supermarket in the UK or in the US, or wherever, you are spending money. And the material, there's data being gathered about your purchases. Whenever you pay for electricity, whenever you pay for telephones, whenever you make phone calls, there's data being gathered about you. Very often, the data that would not be used by anybody. But increasingly, we come to the position that these forms of data are probably more important than the surveys that we sometimes do. Whenever you come from, wherever you've traveled to at the Accra airport, you fill out a landing card. It contains huge, huge information, but nobody does anything with it. So in Ghana, if you ask the immigration authorities Where do people mostly travel to? They don't know. Where do they come from? They don't know. You know, if you ask those questions, they say, well, let's go and do a survey. What the information is sitting there? How do you use it? So many things are being done to ensure that it's channeled properly and used. At ISA, when I was there, well, I'm going back there, we used to bring together young researchers to go to the field with a very heavy questionnaire to go and gather data. They would catch some poor farmer in the Shanti region and interview him for 4 hours and bring the data. Sometimes errors, a lot of errors you can see when you go through. Today, you don't need that. All the material you need can be on an iPad. So and then all you need is, so you ask the questions and everything is being keyed into the iPad. And once you have wireless, and you can do that with whatever, iBurst or Surfline or whatever, the information is coming in real time to the center. So even if the questionnaire should get lost, as a result of the iPad, as a result of the internet, the material is available centrally. That's how the world has changed. And, but you don't see much of that happening here in Africa. So let me go to the state of our universities. Hopefully, I mean, you know all the states, so we should do that rather quickly. The first point I make is that we don't really know much about the state of our university because we don't do much research on the conditions in our universities in Africa. We don't keep much record. There are very, very few African countries that are interested in what happens in their universities. All they care about is, we've given you money, don't bother us. So there's a lack of information about that. We talk about the exception being South Africa. But as a result of that, there are quite a number of issues that come up. There are a number of questions that we can ask ourselves. Basically, are they able to generate the kind of information, the kind of policy orientation that people like Lord Robbins and others were agitating for or calling for? That's the kind of, so there are a number of questions, and if you begin to answer them, you find that it's not as easy as one would expect. So how does this play out? Today, look at that map. It's a map of, I think Adam has used this a few times. So that, you see here, yeah. Prof, it is a map you know very well. Yes. This is a map. It was first drawn in 2003. 2003. And then quite recently, a few months ago, the data was revisited to see if anything had changed. What it tells you that if the world was going to be structured or presented in terms of our relative shares in the knowledge produced, this is where it will be. You see North America there, and you see Europe, and you see Asia expanding rapidly, in the North Asia. And then we see the Africans and the Latin Americans, where our contribution is fairly negligible. What is interesting about the Africa and Latin America scenario is the fact that in the last 7 years, Brazil has tried very hard, also Argentina, they've tried very hard to change by providing new incentives for academics to do a lot more research and improve the classroom environment. Brazil provided money for several thousands of their scholars to go to Europe to study and do research, the kind of thing basically intended to catch up with the rest of the world. Now, in terms of our output, we can also show it more graphically. So you see that basically Africa's share of global production of articles is improving. It moves from just over 1% to just under 2%. So clearly, there's something happening there. There's something happening there, but obviously not fast enough. And we can even find reasons for that something that is happening there. In the last 10 years, more African governments have spent money on research in their universities than they did in the 30 years before, especially in South Africa. So a lot of the push that you see is coming from South African universities, but also a few other sub-Saharan universities, especially Makerere. What is interesting about that new push is that most of the push that you see from places like Makerere, they are in very clear areas, public health. So public health is what is driving the improvements that we begin. So we talk proudly that we the Africans are beginning to finally do something, but it's all money for, I don't want to say Ebola, but So that's the scenario that we have over here. Now, as a result of that, only one university in Africa is ranked in the top 200 universities of the world. That's UCT, Cape Town. Cape Town is the only university in Africa that is ranked by the Times Higher Education in the top 200 universities of the world. And 6 of the top 10 African universities that you find in the top 400 are from South Africa. 6 of the top 10, and I'm happy to say Legon is one of them. So that's 6 of them are from South Africa. As a result of the situation of adequate resources, these are problems that you all know very well. High demand for higher education, but low capacity for expansion. I give the examples from, so 40 years ago, there were 200,000 students throughout the region that are using the space that today is occupied by 10 million students in Africa. In Kenya, the enrollment for public universities increased 487% in that period. But what is, for me, very important is the third bullet. The fact that despite the huge expansion in Kenya, 57% of all those who were qualified to go to university, they didn't find places. 57%. You ask me what is the Ghana situation? It's not much different. It's not much different. It is problematic that there are young Africans who go to university, are qualified to be in a university, and can't find a place in university. Here in Ghana, if you apply to Legon and you get between aggregate 16 and 24, the chances that you enter the university extremely low, extremely low. But there are many. These are not mean achievements. This is no mean achievement to get aggregate 16. Oh, that takes me to an interesting story, an interesting observation I made recently. I went to Achimota School Speech Day for, that was a couple of weeks ago. I met a young woman from Achimota School who got 7 A1s and a B, and is not in a university. She's teaching at Ewasi. 7 A1s and a B at Achimota School. Ivan, I'm sure you will take note of this one and you will do something with it. Why? Why is she not in a university? Because in her mind, she couldn't afford university education, and so they don't apply to any university. So there are many different reasons why young people in Ghana are not going to university, even though they are capable. What I find funny is that, so there are many people, literally thousands of young people with aggregate 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and so on, who can get into our universities. And yet our universities are interested in people who have tried the WASI 3 times, 4 times, can't pass, and then they go and do mature students. So everywhere you pass in Accra, you see big banner, mature students examination, all universities, qualification, no qualification required. Our universities are interested in these ones, but not those with 16, 17, 18, 19. It's something that we need to do something about. Why should people who have got aggregate 16 from whichever school, why can't they get into a university? But those who struggled over several years and finally do the mature are getting in. So that's the situation we have over there. Of course, these are other things. There are questions about relevance. There are questions about unemployment. Every employer in Ghana believes that our students don't know anything. Whether it's true or not, I'm not going to go there. But there's a strong perception that our students don't know anything. Actually, I don't agree. I mean, I think our students know something. So that's something that we need to deal with. And then, of course, The number of women in higher education is also not very impressive. In Ghana, we have improved. At Legon, it's about 45%. Moving, but for some disciplines, I think medicine is more than 50%. Madam Dean, is that right? 49%. We're 49, 50. There's a lot that we need to do in terms of dealing with the challenges. Of course, these are all very well known to you in terms of the brain drain, poor funding, ICT not being used, aging faculty. Aging faculty is a major problem that we've talked about for a long time. There are governance issues that we can't gloss over. A long time ago in this country and also in many other Commonwealth countries, the head of state was the chancellor of the university. It had its own problems. If you read the Alex Kwabon's memoirs, you find a lot of the friction between him and his chancellor. The other challenges include the absence of autonomy. People fear to do what they have to do or say what is on their minds for fear of victimization. You know, it's very easy to get labeled. It's very easy to get labeled. If you're a vice chancellor who speaks his mind too frequently, you get classified as anti-government. And then if you're anti-government, it means that you don't have access to many other things, of course. So you keep quiet, get access, and then see mediocrity in your institution. Lots of academic freedom, and then number of staff available also not good for the teaching faculty. The bureaucracy in our institutions, something that we need to talk about, but we don't talk about often enough. I remember as Vice Chancellor, the number of times when I've seen something and I thought this is easy to change, and we should be able to change this by taking it to the academic board and then being told by your colleagues, well, Mr. Vice Chancellor, that's not how it works. But how does it work? I mean, how are you supposed to work? Clearly, what we have is not working, and common sense tells me that we should change it. But you're telling me, based on your experience here, so you have a bureaucracy that makes change at our universities extremely difficult. So you have that bureaucracy, and then you have another bureaucracy in the ministries. You know, you have another bureaucracy in the ministries. So today you want to do something for the medical school, and you pass it through the Ministry of Education to get some vote for it. Oh no, medicine is health, so we should pass through the Ministry of Health. You know, there are all these various challenges as a result of bureaucracy that we need to talk about. And of course, I talk about over-enthusiastic student activism. Student activism is clearly very, very important and must be supported and encouraged. But when it becomes over-enthusiastic, then it becomes a problem. And today, many African universities are suffering from that. I'm sure you know the Rhodes Must Fall business in South Africa, and then followed by the Fees Must Fall. In Ghana, we have our own version, Gandhi Must Fall. And then Gandhi is not going anywhere. So these are some of the things that we talk about. So talking about governance, in this modern world, the president gets up and then closes the highest ranked sub-Saharan university. He closes it. Why? Because the lecturers are on strike. The lecturers and the students are going to join to support the lecturers. So the president gets up and he closes the university. And why were they on strike anyway? They've not been paid for 8 months. For 8 months, they've not been paid. You know, how do you have a country like Uganda, in terms of economy, not any different from Ghana, and then for 8 months, you can't pay the salaries of your staff in the university, the highest ranked university in the South region. It doesn't make any sense. But of course, it's not uncommon. In Ghana here, we don't go for 8 months, but we do go for several months. And the universities are able to pay because vice chancellors go to the bank and borrow money to pay. I was talking to the vice chancellor of Makerere. He's not allowed to borrow, so he can't borrow to pay. That is where the problem is. So in today's world, the Museveni has closed down the university. It reminds me of the Achampon days when we used to close down university whenever the general was upset. But that's what we have today. Of course, it's not all that bad. The African Union Commission is finally getting interested in higher education. So their interest is largely in the area of quality assurance. I see the Director of Quality Assurance at Legon here. I'm sure you'll be following what the AU has been doing. They don't have much money. Admittedly, they don't have much money, but they are interested in improving support to various national entities for doing the quality assurance, especially the accreditation bodies. The chairman mentioned that I have a new employer called the African Research Universities Alliance. It's an alliance bringing together 16 of the best universities in Africa. They want to solve the problems that we've talked about. So 16 of the vice chancellors met, and they met in Dakar 2 years ago and agreed that we'll have this alliance. We will seek for grants together, and we will do research together. We will exchange students, we will exchange staff, and so on. We will provide support for research management. That's what the vice chancellors are doing. Why? And what is the idea? The idea here is to operate like the Russell Group in the UK, supporting some of the leading universities in order to increase significantly the amount of graduate work being done and also the amount of research being done. So these 16 are 6 from South Africa, namely Stellenbosch, UCT, WITS, Pretoria, Rhodes, and then KwaZulu-Natal. And outside of South Africa, you have Dar es Salaam, we have Makerere, we have Nairobi. We have 3 in Nigeria, Ibadan, Lagos, Ife, and then University of Ghana, and Sheikh Anta Diop in Senegal is the only Francophone one at the moment. We also have Addis Ababa, and then the National University of Rwanda. The intention is to add a few more, so hopefully we'll be able to get KNUST in there. And since we came together, I've seen very significant inquiries from all over about supporting these universities. The idea is for us to be able to work with scientists at WITS or Pretoria in a very able manner and be able to attract some of the largest grants that otherwise would not be available. There's a lot of distance education going on, online facility from South African universities. And then at Legon, we are beginning, we've been talking about, so right now we provide our students in the distance program with iPads, with tablets. Very soon we should be able to activate the online facility going through them. There's evidence that consistent effort yields good outcomes or yields results. If you know where the problem is and you spend money on it and you spend time, you get good results. You may not get the kind of results you are looking for, but you do get results somewhere. That's why we've seen the changes. Today, if you look at all the rankings around the world, the Asian universities are on this steady rise. Today, about 50 of the best 400 are coming from Asia. They've pushed out some of the best-known UK universities, so, of course, with dedication and commitment, you can get results. So, if there was any doubt in my mind about getting results, this chart should show that. What happened? Yeah. So, what this chart shows is how Legon has consistently outperformed other Ghanaian universities. And this is largely because Legon, especially since the time of the visitation panel, Mr. Chairman, I think you remember the panel, you helped us to identify our problems at around 2007. Since then, there has been this very big push in terms of changing things at Legon. And it's leading to positive outcomes as the researchers respond. And this chart shows that What I find interesting about this chart is the fact that our host, CSIR, where all the research money is supposed to be going to, are performing the least. So I believe that as Ghanaians, we should be asking ourselves questions. How do we allocate research money? How do we structure our institutions to do research? That's what we should be asking ourselves about. So what does Africa need to do? Mr. Chairman, I'll be done in a minute. What does Africa need to do to make our universities competitive? And I'm not going to say anything that is unusual. There are a few key assumptions. Many people will say, oh, privatize your institutions, so that's how you're going to get money coming in for this. It's something that we don't believe will lead to the best outcomes. Many of the things that need to be done require considerable investment, and these things are not ripe for private engagement at the moment. So we make the assumption that the privatization of higher education is not something that we can support. I have heard, and as indeed all of you, the Ghana government talk about taking away subvention from the universities. I'll be very honest with you, it will be a disaster. It will be an unmitigated disaster. It will lead to a situation where nobody, not even the wealthy in Ghana, can afford university education. It's something that I think as Ghanaians we need to be very careful about. Competitive markets have a place in higher education. Yes, there's every reason why universities should be competing for resources with others. We need to be mindful that there are issues, there are a number of questions that we need to think about once we get into the market scenario. That's something we talk about. We should also see that in other places like Europe and also the US, where the market has been extremely influential in changing the allocation of resources to universities, some of these things are being reversed. And so that's something we need to also think about. In Asia, the evidence shows that while the world-class agenda was being pushed, a lot of the things that were being done were simply copying what European universities or North American universities had done without much adaptation to the local situation. The only exception there might be Japan, but even the Japanese, in the haste to compete with the Americans, did many things that were quite American. There are three things that I believe we should be pushing in terms of activities. The need to maintain acceptable levels of autonomy with accountability. It's important that our universities remain autonomous, but it's also important that they do account for what they receive from the public purse. It's very important. And the reason why it's important that they account for it is that that's the only way they can justify continuing flows into them from the public purse. It's the only way they can assure the taxpayer that his or her money is being put to good use. It's the only way they can show the private sector what has happened to the research grants given to the university. It's very important. It's a very important. So quite often we take these for granted. We receive money, and as far as we are concerned, it's our money, and nobody should ask us questions. But things are changing. So what they do in many parts of the world, especially in the UK, is the receipt of block grants. So I want to be autonomous, but I said I need public support. So the Ministry of Finance, you look at the budgets of these universities, and then you assign them what is required to run the university, including doing research and teaching. You assign them, and then you release the funds to them, and they manage the funds. They manage the funds. So they can decide, I want to hire a new professor of mathematics, and then reduce the number of professors in marketing, for example. That's a choice that they have to make. It should not be a situation where the Minister of Finance decides, from now onwards, universities, you can't employ anybody. That is an abuse of the autonomy of the university. And that's something that should not be countenanced. But we have a situation where for 4 years, our universities have not been able to hire. So the Minister of Finance has become the Super Vice Chancellor of our universities. He decides how many people can be employed, how many people cannot be employed. There are bureaucrats who want to determine how many students can be enrolled, how many cannot be enrolled, what kind of qualification. That's something that must be stopped. So finance ministers, and it's not just peculiar to Ghana, you find in many countries. So the situation that we've seen in Uganda reflects that experience. Double our efforts to re-engineer the instructional pedagogy. The way we teach students has to change. And I've shown you how it has been changed in other parts of the world using technology. In those places, it's not simply a matter of introducing the technology, but obliging the faculty to make use of them. So it's there, and you have to use it. You have to engage your students online. You have to engage your students through a distance mode. That's something that we need to think about, and we need to. So it means we must invest in our lecture rooms. We must invest in our science labs. We must engage and teach our students. We teach our lecturers how to teach. That's something that we need to do. And then third thing, let's build partnerships for university governance. It is through these partnerships that we'll have access to the resources that otherwise will be unavailable. In order to do it, I talk about building the governance university, having the governance university. There are many things that our university should be. They can be, there are many things that we expect and demand from them. They can be corporate, they can be virtual, governance, African culture, advanced technology, and developmental university. What this means basically is we, as the Africans, through our parliaments, through our governments, and through our civil society, must engage with the university and say, this is what we want you to do. Can you do it? The universities are free to engage also and say, we can do that if you give us this, we can do that if you have this. So that kind of dialogue must take place. And there are many things that are required to make this happen. Of course, we talk about Africa's corporate universities. So as part of the governance overhaul, universities must be run like in a business-like manner. Universities must be run in a business-like manner. There are many examples that one can bring to show the absence of a business-like orientation in our universities, but that's not going to help anybody. It's important that people who teach in universities know that time costs money. They must know that the space that they occupy costs money. As students use electricity, they must know that it costs money. As people consume water, they must know it costs money. And therefore, arrangements need to be made for these. We talk about the need for us to work with the private sector, work with the corporate world. In many parts of the world, as a result of the transformations that we've seen, the relationship between the university and industry has grown much, much stronger. And it's that growth that is supporting the research. Today in South Africa, you find universities that receive strong support from the private sector. Pretoria, for example, derives a lot of support from the mining industry. The mining industry is one of the largest in South Africa, and they support a lot of the engineering, teaching, and research being done at places like Pretoria and KwaZulu-Natal. How can we bring that across the region? So, to finish, Chairman, okay, the government support for higher education and academic research is not going to get any less important in the short to medium term. Basically, government must continue to support universities, but make them accountable. That's the major point we want to make over there. Of course, the policy on the basic conditions that we have in terms of how the university relates to the market also needs to be looked at. If we make it difficult or unattractive for the university to engage the market, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to champion our cause in the future. I finished by saying that the future of the African University depends on how well it uses the new governance structure that is created. If it's able to provide voice for its students, if it's able to provide voice for its faculty, if the leadership of the university become accountable, more accountable, and promote the things that will lead to the growth of the institution, that should really be in the interest of everybody. If the universities are afraid of change, if they are afraid of change, as indeed often happens, we often are very comfortable with the status quo. We are comfortable with the little that we have, and we are afraid that change might lead to some place that we are not sure of, that we don't know, and so we are afraid of it. And the fear of change is what has held back African universities. The fear that change means less government support. The fear that change means being labeled by the public. The fear that change means being a lot more outspoken. The fear that change means younger faculty questioning senior faculty. If we don't go beyond the fear, nothing is going to happen, and we will not be able to use the new technologies that will make it possible for us to become globally competitive. Thank you very much.
Correspondent for What's on Africa of the Royal African Society, the United Kingdom. Professor, thank you very much for the brilliant lecture, and I think learning from you, I'm actually trying to back up one of the fears you spoke about by being a very young person, very challenging and eminent scholar like you. Now, one of the things, I actually observed that you mentioned that it would be an unmitigated disaster for Africans to actually try a full privatization of the public university or universities as we have it now. And I would like to suppose you really imply that when you actually go far, actually much higher or go further on the road to privatization, or slightly higher requirement on the ladder of privatization, the likelihood of disasters actually, the likelihood of disasters happening. But I didn't get the last question. What I'm trying to say is that you actually remark that Africa is actually facing the threat of, or Africa faces the threat of unmitigated disaster if it fully privatizes its university. And I'm trying to make a deduction, subject to your agreement or correction, that, the implication also is that even if Africa dares to climb higher on the ladder of privatizing universities, there is actually the risk of disaster and so on. I would like to really believe that, that then is something that really needs to be looked at and very properly re-examined. Because I think when you look at institutions like Ashesi University, that is almost, fully privatized, doing so well, and currently, as I go, offering about 45 to 50% or more of its students MasterCard scholarships to actually boost access to the school. And this evening, I've also received over $21 million from the MasterCard Foundation for the phase 2 of the MasterCard scholarship program. I'm trying to round up. I think you realize that an institution like Ashesi is becoming a success story of one fully privatized institution doing so well, what prevents other African universities from following its lead? Thank you.
Thank you. You forgive me because I thought the title of your lecture was Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Lecture. So I was wondering if there was anything that Kwame Nkrumah did or said that had any bearing on your topic. That was the first aspect of your presentation that surprised me. The second was a reference point for the university. Because what we know of the German university and the United States university is that they have all been called into question. In fact, the history of the university in the United States of America was built on the enslavement of Africans. And so most of the ideas that comes out of the higher education in the United States of America were producing ideas about the inferiority of Africans. So when the main university, there's a new book that I was referring to called Ebony and Ivory, about the historical background of universities and their relationship to enslavement and therefore ideas of hierarchy. So I would suggest that the lecture would have taken us away from where we want to go, because in terms of what is called globalization, the election of Donald Trump last week has called into question the main ideas of the American university. The third point I wanted to make was with respect to the role of ideas coming from Africa. What is the importance of African ideation systems in mathematics or science in the future of African university? And the last point is your warning about hiring. I think it was a very important point to me in reference to the government. But as an economist, I would have expected you to go further to say who is behind that hiring freeze, and why is that general idea of hiring freeze coming from people who print money and then have us have hiring freeze?
Just one more, and then let's respond. Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just a fundamental question. What is the purpose of a university? I think we need to really examine that carefully. Are we just training people with skills for development, or is a university a place for the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake? Where do we strike the balance?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for these questions. The first question from a young colleague here was about my being worried about privatizing universities. And then you gave the Ashesi example of being an excellent one to push. I believe that in the space that Ashesi occupies, it's doing quite well. But it's not space that can be compared to that of the large public universities. What I was warning about was privatizing public universities. So privatizing Legon. Privatizing Legon by withdrawing the public support to Legon will lead to a massive change in the way the university is financed, which will be extremely different from how Ashesi is financed. So it's not a good idea to say because Ashesi has been successful with this model, all universities in Africa, it would be a very wrong one, and it wouldn't work. They are very different entities, very different cultures, very different histories, and a very different future. Ashesi is doing well in its lane, and Legon is doing very well in its lane. There are things that they can do together, but it will be a mistake. And I hear it all the time on the radio that why is Legon not doing what Ashesi is doing? It will be a very, very bad thing to do. Of course, there are issues of if there are good principles in management at Ashesi that are easily replicable, why not? And I'm quite sure there are things in the public universities that are replicable or can be useful to the private universities. Of course, they share resources, and that should continue. Let me apologize for omitting the Kwame Nkrumah dimension. Indeed, it was a major part of my introduction, but you see, the way I entered the room took it away. That's a nice excuse, isn't it? I intended to talk about Kwame Nkrumah's role in the growth of the public university space, the expansion that we saw in the 3 public universities, also the establishment of the Cape Coast. So KNUST and Legon. There's a lot that one can attribute Nkrumah's push for success, Nkrumah's push. And if you read the speech he read at the when the Institute of African Studies was inaugurated, yes, very, very insightful. It shows exactly what his views about the future of the academy was going to be. And that is something that is common. I mean, it was going to be a part of my introduction, but sorry about that one. But then you talk about the American experience and the need to run away from it. I'm not in any way advocating the placement of the American model in Ghana. That's not, I don't, if I give that impression, I'm sorry, that was not my intention at all. But I don't believe that there's nothing to learn from American, I don't believe that. I'm fully aware of the involvement of slavery in the development of many universities, some of the Ivy League universities. I'm fully aware of that. Quite recently, there's been a lot of attack on the Woodrow Wilson Center in view of how Woodrow Wilson made his money. There are various scenarios playing out. But I don't think simply because the American history leads to particular outcomes, we should shy away from wanting to become globally competitive. Donald Trump may have his views about globalization, and I do have my views about globalization. I'm quite certain that the globalization comes with so many different risks. It comes with so many different risks. And so it's important that we are careful in how we engage with the world. But we also know that if you stay away from the rest of the world, you are not going anywhere. And there are many examples of countries that have operated isolationist methods and have suffered badly. So when we talk about having our universities globally competitive, we also talk about the African culture. You saw it in the slides. How do you make sure that Legon becomes modern, globally competitive, without losing its Africanness? It can be done. You don't need to do that by copying an American model or an Asian model. What is important is the fact that good research is good research, whether it's done in Africa. And Africa's contribution to the development of theory in every discipline must grow. One of the things that we are doing in Arua, I didn't talk about the areas that we are going to focus on, is to ensure that Africa's contribution to scholarship grows significantly. Right now, we are doing less than 2%. It's the Arua mission that within the next 10 years, our contribution to global knowledge creation should move from 2% to 5%. So the strategy was how to achieve that. Africa must compete, and Africa can compete. That's my message. Oh, I think Pati asked the question of the purpose of the university. I gave the 3 examples of what, and I also mentioned that in Africa, we haven't quite focused on what the purpose should be. And I said that it's about time that we engage in various discussions about what the government, what the private sector, what civil society, what the people want from their universities. Of course, so you don't just go to a stakeholders meeting and say this is what we want and then walk away. You must invest. You must invest. There are many, I often hear industrialists talk about the absence of good research to support the work that they do. That's important. I think we should have that discussion, good research to support the work that they do. But during that discussion also, there should be mention of how much industry wants to do in terms of good research. Today, in the world of science, the fastest moving area is nanotechnology. Apart from a couple of South African universities, nobody in this region is doing any work in nanotechnology because we believe it's far-fetched. What it means is that for years to come, material that we use for production, material that we use for packaging, material we use for everything that we do, we will be driven by others. It's about time that Africans began doing research in nanotechnology. And it's one of the things we want to do in Arua. But it means also that African governments must be willing to spend money on nanotechnology. I can assure you, every time I watch TV, I see young men developing new apps for, the last one I saw was to collect church tithes. They've developed apps that make it easier for churches to collect their tithes. Yes, I'm happy that people are being inventive. I'm happy that people are being creative. And the software industry is booming, and Africans have found a niche in there. But the basic things that would supply this inventiveness with products is not being done. Agriculture, industry. So you haven't done the research to produce the food, but you are developing an app for selling it a lot more easily. That's where we must focus. So that's where the government must come in and say, look, wait a minute. I'm giving you money, go and do more research on biotechnology, more research on biodiversity, more research on nanotechnology. I'm giving you money to do that. And I see Professor Tego here, he's a chairman of NCT, and also interested in the research fund that is coming. That research fund must make a big difference. It shouldn't be a fund that is simply used to score points. The government will say, oh, but I've put money into research. It might be meaningful. Thank you.
I really feel very sorry to bring things to a close at this stage, because the discussion has only just started. It seems to me that listening to NSIT make his presentation brings up a completely different tone from the public discussion of our universities in the last 10 years, where the focus has tended to be on creating jobs. What are our universities doing in creating jobs? What are we doing about the unemployed graduates and so on? I didn't hear anything at all about that dimension of the discussion. Interesting, isn't it? But I think it is absolutely vital for us to take on board this very important focus on making our universities globally competitive, on the one hand. But add a rider. They should be globally competitive, but also locally relevant. That, for me, is the debate that needs to be had in Ghana. There is no doubt that unless our universities, by and large, are able to match the best in the world, they are frankly not worth having. At the same time, we invest in them in order to get returns from them. The global competitiveness is the quality of their work. But the quality of their work has meaning if it serves our purposes. So I think it's important to focus on the issue of quality improvement, global competitiveness, and so on, without for a moment losing the rootedness of our institutions in our problems and our reality. So I will combine Professor Aite's global competitiveness drive with a local relevance connection. But I will not go the way of those who look to our universities to produce all the jobs we need to produce industrial workers of all sorts the day after they leave university. No. What seems to me to rise from the discussion you've triggered is the absence so far in Ghana of a serious, well-informed discussion of the place of the university, one, in the higher education system, because it's not the whole higher education system, it's just a part of it. What is the university's part in that system? One. And what is the role of the higher education system in the education system as a whole? And what has that got to do with the way in which we plan and deliver our lives? I'm saying this because we don't seem, as a country, to have taken a broad enough look at the role of education in development. We've taken positions on this or that, and governments have funded this or that, and under pressure, blame the university for not producing the workers we need, not creating jobs, and so on and so on and so on. So for me, the value of your discussion, Ernest, has been to focus our minds on a very important aspect of the problem. The questions began to raise other dimensions, and it's a shame there isn't time for us to do that now. And I'm hoping that the academy or somebody else will pick up the broader issue of where our universities fit, locally, but also globally. And I think for your being able to draw our minds to this, I speak for everybody in the room here in thanking you very warmly for walking the last 400 yards in order to deliver this lecture to us, which we will take on board. Thank you all very much indeed for coming along. Thank you for our support during the week in which the Academy was celebrating its founders. And good night. Thank you.
We also thank the chairman for ably doing justice to the chair this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the close of this evening's event. There will be light refreshment. Our invited guests will have their refreshment in the right foyer, and fellows of the academy will have theirs in the left foyer. Have a pleasant evening.